Yes. All right. I believe we are live. Tom, the NBA trade deadline day is today. The deadline will end in about 90 minutes. A lot of stuff has happened. You're kind of catching up on a lot of it because you went on a run this morning as I was furiously refreshing Twitter. We had very different mornings. So there's a lot that's happened. I think the way we're going to start here is by talking about the one person who hasn't been traded yet, and that's Kyle Lowry. Oh wait, Tom, hold on. The fans can't hear you. Let me figure that out. No. I think try again.
Hello?
Okay, you're good.
All right. So, yeah. So late last night, you and I were talking, and in the hours of no trades happening, I think we kind of looked at that and agreed, okay, so this is everybody waiting to see where Kyle Lowry goes, and then everyone will make their plan B, plan C, plan D trades behind that. And we wake up this morning, we start seeing news roll in, and it looks like the opposite is happening now, where a bunch of teams are sort of proactively saying, no, we're good. We're going to cash out here. Like you had the Philadelphia 76ers go for George Hill instead of remaining in the Lowry sweepstakes. Um, the Denver Nuggets, who were looked at as like an outside Lowry team, they've traded for Aaron Gordon. Norm Powell went to
Portland.
Trailblazers, who weren't a Lowry team, but like Norm Powell was, I think, looked at as kind of like a companion piece to Lowry here.
Yeah. It's the thing is that for a while, over the last 24 hours, for no real reason, besides just my gut and what I was seeing on Twitter, I was starting to feel like maybe Lowry wasn't going to get traded. I have no sources for this. This is just what I was feeling. I felt like maybe the asking price was getting too high for certain teams. But now with Powell being traded to Portland, it feels like that is.
Mm-hmm. And sorry for that brief ASMR of me chewing eggs. We were talking before we came on, and I think I was saying to you, Philly cashed out of the Lowry deal, but I don't necessarily think that means the Lowry deal's not happening. I think that could just be Philly being the team with like the longest term. I don't want to use the phrase championship window, but like the longest term planning here. Because like if you look at Miami and the Clippers, who are probably the two other teams that have been like seriously rumored for Lowry, Kawhi Leonard's got to be in his 30s at this point. Paul George's in his 30s at this point. Jimmy Butler is 31 at this point. So like that's the top two players on the Clippers and either the first or second best player on the Heat, depending on the night. I Twitter about that are all looking in a shorter term at have to win a championship. And so I think those teams trading draft picks and young players for someone who's going to help you win right now, they've got a little bit of a higher threshold too high. Whereas if you're Philadelphia, Joel Embiid is 24. Like you can afford to wait a couple of years, and like there is a risk that you blow up something better than this 1 year of Kyle Lowry. Like you're not going. You don't need to push all of your chips to the center right now if you're Philly.
You're also already
at least not as much as
you're already in a great position.
At least, yeah.
You are. I mean, still first in the East. And now they have made the move for George Hill, which I think we can pretty safely assume was their backup to Lowry, and means that Lowry's off the table for them. Who knows? Things could change. I don't know. But I would assume that Lowry's off the table for Philly now. I do think this kind of becomes a three-way competition of the Heat and the two LA teams. I don't know how legit the Lakers' interest is. I'm sure they're interested, but stuff is so hard to speculate on, but sometimes it just feels like, okay, maybe they're just using a leverage thing, raise the price on Lowry, because the Lakers getting Lowry would be so difficult money-wise and would pretty much require them trading like multiple really important pieces of their team.
Like it would probably have to be Schroeder and Morris and then some stuff.
And I'm sure they want a young player in there, so you probably have to throw in Horton Tucker or someone like that. And I don't see why the Lakers need that extra push right now. The only reason they haven't been lighting the league on fire this year is because Davis has been injured so much. Now LeBron's injured. Like, I don't think it's a necessary trade for them to make. I did say last week on this pod that I did think the Heat trade for Kyle Lowry was my number one trade for them, and it was the one I felt like could be the most necessary because of what we were just talking about with the window with Jimmy Butler. When you're and I won't hesitate to say I do think Jimmy has been the better player this year. When your best player is 31 and does not have the type of game that can age particularly well because he's not a fantastic shooter. The clock runs out pretty quickly, I think. And you got Butler, you got Dragic, you got Iguodala, you got Ariza now. You got a lot of old dudes on this team. And yeah, I just don't know what the trade is going to look like at this point, if it even happens.
Well, now let's talk about that Heat trade, because the Heat today have already been active in that they traded Chris Silva and
Mo Harkless.
Gabe Vincent?
Mo Harkless
to the Sacramento Kings for Nemanja Bjelica. And you had an interesting point about Bjelica. What is the sort of the Heat Twitter speculation right now about what Bjelica's role might be for the Heat?
So the general idea that I've seen around here is that I'd say Bjelica gives you about 75% of what Kelly Olynyk gives you. I think you can make an argument that the argument that has been made is that this could be a sign of things to come of Kelly moving. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it is, because Kelly is the integral part to Kelly or Iguodala are the integral parts to any Heat trade because they have the contracts that make the money work. Kelly also pairs so fantastically well with Bam in a way that I think Bjelica also probably would. Bjelica has not shot it particularly well this year, though, which makes me a little bit worried, but neither is Kelly, really. So, I don't know. But at the end of the day, two guys who are not in the rotation, in Silva and Harkless, for one guy that is. And I've been very public about my frustration with Mo Harkless at the beginning of the season. Since then, we've barely seen him because he was in health and safety protocol, and now he's had Silva, end of the bench guy, seems like a great guy. Everyone on the team really liked Chris Silva. He's one of those guys.
Oh yeah.
High effort guy who, like about a year ago, or not a year ago, I think it was in the bubble maybe. The Heat, Chris Silva. Let me double check where he is from. Chris Silva is from Gabon. He had not seen his mom in a couple years since moving to the United States. And the Heat made a whole big thing of they flew his mom over. There was a big party for the reuniting of Chris Silva and his mom. Really nice. I like the guy a lot.
That is really nice.
Yeah, can't say I really think we'll miss him too much. But yeah, so I'd say now the dominoes left are obviously Lowry, Oladipo, maybe.
Oladipo.
And
I think it's the interesting thing with Vic is like it looks like the market is less there for him than was previously believed. Like, I'm trying to think. I know probably 2 days ago now there was the report that came out that was like, oh, well, the Knicks and the Bulls are looking at Victor Oladipo, but also like multiple other teams have emerged offering Ricks, plural, for Oladipo. And it was like, okay, well, this sounds pretty transparently like Houston trying to muddy the waters a bit story. But yeah, so right now Oladipo's still a Houston Rocket. I mean, I think it makes sense. We don't really know exactly what he's going to be going forward. He's not what he was before the injury still. And I mean, that's unfortunate because he's still really good, but he was like an all NBA level player before that injury happened. But I think it makes sense with him heading towards unrestricted free agency this offseason. Like, I can see why a lot of teams are looking at that and being like, do we want to give up like what's probably going to be maybe a step below the Drew deal for what might be 50 games of Victor Oladipo? Like, that's That might be a little bit steep.
It's a little steep. I think if Oladipo gets traded, I really can't imagine it can be for much at this point. I mean, it's just a rental, no matter what.
Yes.
There's so much buzz about Oladipo wanting to go to Miami. Who knows how true that stuff buzz in the air. A lot of other teams also just have to be hesitant about, like, are we going to give anything up for this guy if he's just wants out in 3 months? Yeah. The other one, I mean, Mark Stein tweeted that one of the last guys left all. Lonzo had gone back and forth in being in trade talks for the last 6 weeks, going from being like one of the most talked about trade pieces to not much at all to, I feel like in the last 48 hours being talked about again. So I don't know where the ball market is. I feel like it's got to be the same teams that were in the Lowry and Hill market, though.
And the interesting thing with like the Lonzo being like a substitute for a Lowry or a Hill is that, like, when he has played himself sort of back out of trade discussions, it's been in a different role than Lowry and Hill are playing.
Yeah. Definitely.
And so I think like there's this perception of like, oh yeah, Lonzo Ball will be a young point guard. Like, he'll come in, run the floor for us, like engineer our offense. And like, he probably can do that. But I feel like the best of Lonzo Ball that we've seen is a little bit more of an off-ball guard that's going to be able to shoot the ball, make some plays like as a sort of weak side playmaker kind of deal, and also defend across multiple positions. Like, that seems to be where his bread and butter is in the league right now.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I feel like Lonzo's another guy who I think is heading for restricted free agency. So like, you have all these guys who that's holding them up kind of is going to sign for these teams in the offseason. And honestly, that's another thing with Lowry. Lowry's about to become a free agent. If you're the Heat, for example, I would be really hesitant about throwing in Hero for what could literally just be 3 months of Lowry. Now, everything looks fine at the end of the day if you win the championship. But that's a big gamble to bet on.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when, like, and I know that, like, we don't want to do too much sort of optics talk, but like, Hero in the deal for James Harden. And now it's going to be, well, we threw him in for Lowry, and like, love Kyle Lowry, he's not James Harden.
Yeah. I think if a Heat deal ends up happening, it's going to be Robinson, Precious, and Kelly. And then maybe Kendrick Nunn. But at that point, that's a lot of guys. But Robinson's probably the headliner there.
Well, now the question is...
And then Precious is the young player.
Do you think they give up some combination of those guys and some picks for Oladipo and try and get, like, maybe get away with not giving up Precious? Or do you think it's more likely that they give the whole thing to Toronto and they bring in Kyle Lowry?
Yeah, that's tough to say. I feel like it's all about what the leverage is at this point. I mean, I think there's a good chance that if the Heat don't end up with Lowry here, they could end up with Oladipo.
I believe it.
But it's so hard to say. Like, so much of this is speculative. The Heat have been completely silent over the past 48 hours, and then this Bjelica deal pops up. So, yeah, I can't say I know. But as far as what I would prefer to happen, I think you have to be honest in saying, like, if Houston comes with Oladipo and asks for Hero, that's a non-starter.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I think you talk about it with Lowry. But Yeah, I don't know what the direction is for Toronto right now. The Powell trade, we can kind of pivot. The
Yes. So
Raptors trade Norm Powell to the Blazers for Gary Trent and Rodney Hood. I've seen this interpreted a lot of ways on Twitter already. Blazers get another 20-point score, a ridiculous amount of offensive firepower now from the guard position. I've seen some takes about this that I actually do think there's some credence to, about how, like, was this actually the position of need for Portland? Not sure. Does Trent, even though he is going to be a free
not
agent,
really.
does Trent maybe just fit in that system a little bit better? Maybe. Hard to say
Well,
until
when
we
you start doing the minutes math, like when you start doing the minutes sort of construction in a playoff series, like your point guard and shooting guard minutes are pretty solidly marked up. Like it's going to be, I don't know, 37, 38 minutes of Dame Lillard at point guard, 37, 38 minutes of CJ McCollum at the 2. Maybe you're counting on CJ like easing back into the rotation a little bit, but like, what does it wind up being? Norm Powell at the 3?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess you throw Norm at the 3, or let's see, what has Norm been playing this year? Norm has been playing 53% of his minutes at the 3. But for his career,
what's that final like 7%?
Oh, it's 3% at the point guard.
That's funky.
But that doesn't add up to. No, that adds up to 100.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's odd. I got to see the fit. I think
for sure
the Blazers have kind of found themselves now in a forward like log jam, which is not something they had before. They have a lot of guys that can play the.
I think if you're the Blazers, I think there's an explanation for this trade where you look at like the amount of times last postseason and even this season where it's been, we have a 4-minute stretch where our offensive game plan is throw the ball to Carmelo Anthony on the elbow, and that's it. And in that regard, Norm Powell helps you a lot because Norm Powell is another player that can score in those minutes. And maybe that's all this is, because he is unrestricted after this year, and it seems like Toronto is hesitant to extend him for the money he's probably going to get. I also think if you're Portland, you kind of get out from under the Gary Trent restricted free agent sweepstakes, where we see it a lot with restricted free agents where it's oh yeah, well, this guy went out and got an offer from a team that won 25 games last year, but they had to match it because it's their guy, and now all of a sudden they're capped out a year later, or they're
Jeremy
Grant
looking
looking for somewhere to move. So if you're perfect example, yeah.
I feel
like it's kind of Toronto. You go.
No. I was gonna about the trade, so you finish up.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is it's this weird kind of Toronto and Portland both looking at each other well, we don't want to match whatever Gary Trent's going to get offered, and then Toronto being well, we don't want to have to say we're not going to extend someone who's been here a while, kind of worked his way up through the rotation, a very Raptors guy.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of all right, yeah, we'll both just flip them, and then when they don't get extensions after the season, it'll be because they weren't our guy.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, but they're both probably going to get contracts either way that are pretty lucrative. And I mean, Norm Powell probably just winds up being a consolidation in the Blazers lineup.
I think because of what you were saying before about how many playoff minutes we saw last year that end up being mellow ball. I think you probably play Powell a ton without the 2 of Dame or CJ, or just with one of them out there, because I do feel like that's a little too much ISO ball between the 3 of them at the same time. And maybe it's just good to have Norm as this offensive firepower I don't think he's going to come off the bench, not something like that, but like I don't know. Maybe he should be in a Jordan Clark.
Yeah.
Who knows? I do think we're in the league. Not that we're in the league. The league's in a weird position where like teams have to do this. Where like, oh, this role player that we really like and have grown, from the G League, he's too good now and he's going to make too much money, so we have to trade him.
Yeah.
It's just a weird thing we're in. That just happened with Jeremy Grant. It's just happened with Norm Powell. Wouldn't be surprised if in the next hour and 10 minutes it happens with Duncan Robinson. Like,
Yeah.
it's like when a player, we're in a weird point where with team contracts where like there's players aren't seen actually as worth what they are still going to be paid. It's kind of a weird paradox.
Yes. I think there's this interest. There's a belief in the NFL where the draft is 7 rounds, that basically your draft position follows you for your entire career. And the thought behind that is like, all right, yeah, if you have a first-round draft pick at, let's say, wide receiver, it'll be like, yeah, he runs a 4.3 40-yard dash. Like, he's 6'3", 230. He's that fast. He's got great hands. Like, you have all, like, this tape on him showing what he can do on the field. And, like, even if this first-round wide receiver doesn't work out, there's still a lot of tape on him of him doing incredible things. The teams are going to keep taking a chance on him throughout his career because they think, like, all right, there's something in here, we can unlock it. Whereas, like, if you're drafted in the 6th round and it's like, yeah, well, he's kind of small. His speed doesn't jump off the screen at you, but, like, he's kind of shifty. He can make some plays. You're kind of working against that. And where it's like, all right, no, I think, like, we think we've seen the most of what he can be if he has a good year or two. And I feel like that's kind of the thing that's happening in the NBA now, where it's like, well, we got Duncan Robinson. We weren't expecting him to become, like, the best three-point shooter in the league for multiple years running. That, like, percentage-wise, don't yell at me about Steph. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
For the type of, we weren't expecting this.
Yeah, for the type of shooter Duncan is, he's in the top 2 or 3.
Don't exactly want to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but I think it's one of those. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you came out of the G League and, like, you were in the G League for reasons, like whether it was Duncan Robinson maybe being, like, a little undersized or, like, maybe not the best defender coming out of college, and, like, when you get into contract negotiations at the end of the rookie deal, that's the sort of thing that probably comes back up. Like, well, we can't give you this much money because of X or Y or Z. Definitely. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the comparison I'm trying to draw. Is basically like you gotta do something special, I guess, to become, like, a max guy from the G League.
Yeah, no, you do. You have to. You have to be seen as more than just, like, a really great role player, because I think with Powell, with Duncan, with Jeremy Grant might be a little bit better than the two of them, but, like, if you're not going to be an all-star, then why are we paying you, $20 million? But, if you're a contending team that has money, like Brooklyn this summer, you can pay your Joe Harris however much money. And that's the unfortunate thing for the Heat there, is that, like, that Joe Harris and that Davis Bertans contract completely set the market for Duncan.
Yeah.
And because they're both fantastic three-point shooters, and now we might be forced to pay that in 3 months, or we can try to get him, or we lose him for nothing, or we try to move him in a big deal today. Yeah, I think I've kind of convinced myself that I really do think if anything happens today, that the headliner is Duncan. But I don't know. Now it's the question of Toronto has just gotten Hood and Gary Trent. So what are they looking for? Are either of those guys long-term pieces for them?
So Gary Trent is restricted after this season, Rodney Hood is signed for next season and then is off the books.
Mm.
So, I mean, there was kind of this belief percolating in the past couple days that Toronto might look to do like a 1 year sort of, not a full rebuild, but just like a little bit of a reload. Like, all right, yeah, we're moving on from Lowry. We're ripping the Band-Aid off there. We'll move on from Powell, but we're still going to come back with Van Vliet. We're going to come back with Siakam. And we'll have some stuff. We'll have some pieces. We can make something happen. And they'll probably have some money now.
Yeah,
I think
around a Van Vliet Siakam. I don't know if that's, winning you the championship, but a Van Vliet Siakam.
Oh, they'll have OG too.
And yeah, building around Van Vliet Siakam OG is.
I agree. Like I think you could do a whole lot worse. And like, I don't think that bringing in Trent or bringing in Rodney Hood necessarily takes you out of doing that, because like they could very easily just like they'll have match rights on Gary Trent this offseason, meaning if a team comes in and offers Gary Trent a contract, they can just say, well, we're matching it, you're coming back. But they could also just let him walk and say, all right, yeah, well, we got out from the $10 million that Norm Powell was making and the, like, I don't know, 18, 19 million that he was probably going to make this offseason. And you've saved a bit of money. You move on from Lowry. You don't know what the expiring contracts. So maybe you have like a whole new young core that you're building around, where it's like Van Vliet and Siakam and Duncan Robinson, or Tyler Herro, or Kelly Olynyk, who's not really that young, but you get my point. So yeah, I don't think that trading Norm Powell away takes them out of. I don't think it takes them out of doing that.
Yeah. Just to move on here, point where there hasn't been anything in like an hour, and there was a whole flurry of stuff a while ago. So over some of this stuff, let's just get like quick impressions here. So let's Orlando did a whole ton of stuff today. The first big news that broke this morning was that, sorry, I'm just trying to get the exact trade. The Orlando Magic traded Nikola Vucevic to Chicago for Wendell Carter and Otto Porter. What are your thoughts on seeing that trade, Tom?
I mean, I think Chicago also sent 2 first-round picks in that deal, and I love it for the Bulls, first of all. I mean, if you look at like that sort of low playoffs to play in class of team that exists right now, like I'm pulling up the standings right now, but the Bulls are in the thick of it right now. They're currently, let's see, game off the Pacers in 9th. Like they're firmly in the play-in race, and as Toronto trades away rotation players, I think they're probably going to wind up being that 10th team at the lowest, just because like I don't see Cleveland making a run. With the Bulls adding Vooch, they're probably going to be better now. I don't see Washington suddenly making another run. I don't see Orlando jumping up. So I think we're going to start to see that like 11 through 15 distance themselves in the other way. But I love it. Like you get into that play-in round, and like you can kind of score with anybody now. With Levine, with Vucevic, with Lowry shooting in the corner. Like you've got a really good offensive team. Can you defend? Maybe not like the most, but you couldn't do that already. You were already going to have to win in shootouts. Mm-hmm. And like against the Indiana Pacers, it's not the worst bet to be like, no, we think our offense is going to run a little bit more smoothly than theirs. Like against Boston, where you get into those rotations where it's like Jaylen Brown and 4 guys who might be able to spray home a 3 here and there, but like aren't really creating a lot. Yeah, you can bet on your offense running more smoothly than that. So like, I like it, ultimately. I think the Levine-Vucevic pick and roll is going to be devastating. That's going to be incredible to watch. I don't think Vucevic is suddenly going to turn into like this Clint Capella level dive man, but I do think he's going to be a center that can finish a lot off of that. I like the trade for Chicago. I think probably one of the worst, like one of the bigger, like, oh God, why did we sign that guy to that contracts in the NBA at this point. for Wendell Carter, like I got a couple friends who are Bulls fans, and the perception I think around Bulls Twitter or Bulls like fandom is all right, yeah, like Wendell hasn't really panned out. But I think he's in that kind of sweet spot where it's like, yeah, Wendell was looked at as a bust. But now he's in the spot where like basketball hipsters will kind of tell you he's coming back up and like trending up from bust,
Mm-hmm.
which is the perfect time to trade him because it's like,
Yeah.
all right, yeah, we're seeing potential again. But now the potential is coming across in the NBA. So like I don't think the Bulls really the first round picks might not like the first round picks are probably the most precious part of that deal for them. But if you're Chicago and you're trying to say like, no, we're going to set ourselves up for a couple of years of making the playoffs, then I feel like you can stomach losing those.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the Bulls are. Look, they're not going to be a fantastic defensive team. They weren't before this trade. But the scoring potential here is, as you were saying, like really deadly. A team with Levine and Vucevic on it, two guys who are very unique in their positions of just kind of being able to score from anywhere on the court, is really. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing that happen. I agree on Carter. If you remember, I had him on my list of most intriguing players for 2021. Really, just because I thought he was someone who really suffered under the previous coaching administration there, and thought maybe he could kind of bounce back. He hasn't been great. He's also been hurt, so kind of difficult to really judge him too harshly there, I think. The guy I'm kind of interested in now is Lauri Markkanen and what his position is there, because I don't know. Lowry has not been great this year.
Yeah.
And I really don't think you want to hang your hat on a Markkanen Vucevic front court for the playoffs if you actually want to try to make some noise. Because that's pretty bad.
It's not going to be a good defensive front court. I do wonder how much like I don't think the Bulls look at this and say like we're going to win an NBA Finals now, but I do think there's like some element of no, okay, we can be like a team that wins a play-in game or two, gets into a 2-7 matchup game here, like makes some good money off of playoff games. There's some value to that, especially when you're a Chicago team that like hasn't made the playoffs since Jimmy Butler was there.
Yeah.
Like I think there's something to that.
There is something to that. Also, I should correct myself. Markkanen actually has played well this year. I don't know why I had the perception that he hadn't. He's probably not looking like as good as you'd hoped he would have looked 4 years in.
Okay.
But he's still playing pretty well. With this addition of Vooch, they probably can't make... I don't know if they can make the trade right now. But I actually now really like the Bulls as a Harrison Barnes team.
I think the tough part is probably the Porter contract was what allows that to happen.
Yes. But yeah. So yeah, I think this is a really nice play for the Bulls. They're going to be dangerous in a playoff series, I think. Not like... Yeah, like you said, they're not winning the championship. They're not making the conference finals. And I don't think they're making the second round, probably. But there's some positives here. Maybe they can make the second round if they can get in the 5 seed, And that's not unachievable. They're probably like 2 games back from it with the way the East is structured.
I can tell you exactly how far back the Bulls are from the 5 seed. Give me a sec. Never mind, I closed the ESPN app, but I will open it up and I will tell you exactly how far back they are. Also, in the event that they can't trade for Harrison Barnes, could the Bulls be a Kenrich Williams? Seen a lot of but like his name is one that's kind of started being floated.
Lots of Kenny Hustle tweets.
Lot of Kenny Hustle tweets.
I saw a tweet the other day though that said, I mean, who knows if this is reputable. But that said, that Thunder really love Kenrick and don't want to trade him, and want to see him as a part of that SGA Dort
That's interesting.
Poku young core. Um,
Poku.
but
It's funny too because like I feel like coming into this season we said it like no one other than SGA and maybe Dort is like that precious here. But we're getting to the point where the Thunder have seen these guys play in the NBA for some time and are starting to like what they see from certain people and like are starting to look at it and be like, well, no, we'd like to hang on to this player for a couple of years because like even if we're not going to be winning championships and we're going to be making like 7 first-round picks in a year, we'd still like to hang on to some players.
oh yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like
no,
it's a part of the process that I don't think we foresaw.
no. I think at the beginning of the season, we were just like saying how they're a whole bunch of guys, and then SGA, and then Horford and Hill. But yeah,
Mhm.
they've done a pretty good job actually finding some of these guys in the rough. Who knows if Poku's going to be any good, but Dort looks great. I know people like Baisley. People love Kenrick Williams. So ultimately, I think you have a nice future here. And then Bobby Marks just tweeted like an hour ago that now with this George Hill trade, the let me get it exactly. I'm pretty sure they have something ridiculous like over the next 7 picks,
That sounds about right. Yeah.
um, which like almost feels too many to know what to do with. Um,
It's also and like this part is pretty obvious, but I think needs to be said. It's far too many to actually make all of them.
oh yeah, you'd have too many
Like
players.
the Chicago Bulls simply they cannot or the Oklahoma City Thunder cannot have like 37 players on a roster at one time. So like do they just do the basically just kick the can down the road with some of these and be like, yeah, we'll pick up a 1 and a 2 for this one like 2 years away. But like even then you're going to have to start probably consolidating some of this at some point because you can't make 35 draft picks.
Tom, we have a Woj. I don't know what the word would be here. Maybe a firecracker or
Not quite bomb.
a I wouldn't even
A
call it a fire.
Woj,
Like a
like a Woj pop rock.
yes, a Woj pop rock. But could it mean something else? It is Toronto is trading Matt Thomas to the Jazz for a second round pick.
Toronto trading Matt Thomas to the Jazz for a second round pick.
No players going back
I mean,
to Toronto.
the interesting thing here is that like it can't really be them clearing a ton of like roster space to make a Lowry trade because they took on 2 players to get Powell out of there.
This is true, but I will say Kevin O'Connor just tweeted this deal opens up a roster spot necessary to make a Lowry trade. So I might need to double check exactly how.
Is it like one of those they had 14 players and bringing Hood and Trent on got them to 15 and then they're back down to 14 now?
Probably, yeah. That would probably be it. Maybe they were at 14. Also have a tweet from Clay Ferraro tweeting something that Shams said on his show that he's doing a live stream right now. Shams just reported that Toronto is engaged with the Lakers and Heat. Lakers offering KCP and Schroeder. Heat. Toronto wants Hero and THT. I feel like that makes sense.
Okay, so the Lakers offer is KCP, Schroeder, THT.
No, so the Lakers offer right now is Schroeder and KCP. The Raptors want the addition of THT.
Huh. That's interesting because it kind of winds up being like this is the conversation we had with Kyle Kuzma last year when they traded for Anthony Davis, where it was, well, that's a young player who can clearly play at the NBA level, can score when LeBron goes to the bench, and with all the picks they traded for Anthony Davis, not a player they're going to be able to get into their system easily.
Right.
They don't have draft picks going forward that are going to yield that kind of high return. So I can see why the Lakers are hung up on it. I can also see why the Raptors want it, though, because KCP, if you're a team that's trying to hit a bit of a reset, he's, I think, more valuable to the Lakers than he would be to the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, if the Raptors
so then you're basically looking at it
if the Raptors pull off either of these, they have assembled a pretty it's not an amazing team, but they've assembled kind of the rest. Just they have 8 great role players.
Yeah,
and then Van Fleet and Siakam on top of it.
Yeah, that's I think the part where I go okay, KCP, obviously you got to make the money work, but KCP would be a weird, not weird, but I can understand where they'd be no, we'd also like this young player, because your starting lineup then is probably what, Schroeder, Van Vliet, OG, Siakam, although they're playing OG at a small ball center now, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, going forward for this year, it would probably be those 4 and Trent, which you're going to probably Schroeder's kind of an animal defensively. Van Vliet can hold his own. Trent probably is your weakest defender there. But you're not going to get killed defensively.
No, and you're just kind of creating another situation of the classic Raptors team of the last couple of years, where it's just they have a lot of good guys.
Yeah.
Also, Woj just tweeted in response to the Matt Thomas trade, deal opens a roster spot to take on an additional player in a Lowry trade. Raptors continue talking to teams on deals within 45 minutes of deadline. Thomas, endless line of 3-point shooters on the team. Yeah, that's watch Matt Thomas just score just getting wide open threes.
He's going to do it in the playoff game.
Yeah.
He's absolutely going to do it. Second round playoff series against the Lakers, we're going to get the Matt Thomas game.
So yeah, now we got 48 minutes. 47 minutes.
Do you think that THT winds up being in the Lowry deal? Basically, okay, 5 minutes to the deadline. Lowry still has not moved. Where do you think he is in 55 minutes?
This is the boring pick. I think he's gonna stay.
Really?
I just feel like there's a chance. I don't know. I don't know. This Matt Thomas trade kind of changes things, because it's now they're making the moves happen to open up a spot. But
yeah,
if that most recent trade that most recent stuff I just read is correct, I feel like either he's staying or he's a Laker, because I think the Lakers are going to give up THT quicker than the Heat give up Hero.
I would agree with that. I think also it's interesting, props to Masai for basically bringing the Lakers out of the woodwork and pitting them against Pat Riley.
Yeah.
I think we saw the Rockets try to manufacture an Oladipo market where it was just well, we have teams interested. Masai was no, I just need to bring one team out for the Heat to be bidding against, and now I'm probably going to get one of THT or Hero.
Yeah.
Because somebody's probably going to talk themselves into making this deal by the deadline.
Yeah.
At least I think. I know you think he's staying. I kind of think the Lakers are going to wind up parting with THT, especially with LeBron going down, because I feel like that's kind of a like reality check moment where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we don't like. I think LeBron's still got a few years left of being an incredible player. Like he's MVP level this year, but I think it is kind of a, oh yeah, LeBron is 36. This is his 18th year in the league. Like we might not have too many more cracks at it.
Yeah. Um,
So that's what ends up being a Laker.
it's starting to feel like that. It feels like a response.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another Shams thing here. Um, the hold up on both teams is Talon Horton Tucker and Tyler Hero, which also could just be a leverage thing.
Can
like, these trades could happen without either of those guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they could, but I feel like now that they're, well, I suppose if you're Toronto, like, I think you're in a position where you can say, like, no, we're good hanging on to the greatest player in franchise history.
Yeah.
Like, we would like to send him to a place where he has an opportunity to win another ring, but we'd also, like, we and our fans would probably also be okay just rolling him out for the rest of the season. I don't know though. Like with everything that happened last night, it seemed like with him walking out, posing for the camera, being like plus 42 in that game, that seemed like a very farewell-ish night.
It felt like such a farewell. He apparently Lowry is not one who like loves talking to media post game. And last night Lowry had like stayed with the media for like a half hour.
Oh yeah.
He got the Drake phone call. I mean, these are maybe dumb little things, but there's a lot of weird random signs here that he knew it was about to happen too.
I think it's interesting because like we forget that like while they're playing basketball, these are also people's lives that are happening like around the game. And so yeah, like Kyle Lowry played, I forget who last night, but was plus 42, came off, and like this could be the end of a chapter in his life. Like he's been in Toronto for I think 9 years at this point. And like you have that's long enough where you have a life there. Like you have, you know, your favorite grocery store, you have your places you like to eat, you know, like exactly how long it takes you to get to the practice facility, you know exactly how long it takes to get to the arena. It's not like this is just a small like, well, yep, gonna jaunt over to LA for a couple months. Like it's kind of a big milestone, I feel like.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like seeing, I don't know, it's nice to be reminded of that is what I'll say.
Yeah. It's also just fun to see like a player go out being traded on like good terms. After the Harden disaster this year, like where the only stories that were being posted were like everyone in the locker room hates him and like things like that. It's nice to just see something where it's like, yeah, I mean, this is kind of a mutual agreement here. The Raptors are going in a new direction. Kyle's about to be a free agent, and we want to send him somewhere where he wants to play and can be successful. But yeah.
Well, and also, yeah, I mean, you touched on it, like an organization that's actually willing to kind of work with a guy who's been that franchise player. And I mean, obviously, when like OKC traded Paul George, it was like, yeah, well, he asked, and like we're kind of okay getting out from under this core, so yeah, we'll trade him. But like when they traded Russ, I feel like that was a pretty, actually no, because that was going Harden. I don't know. It's nice on both ends to just see this go amicably. I guess I'm just parroting what you said at this point, but I agree with it entirely.
Yeah, I know.